We want to help you, Mr. Valentine. My brother and I run a privately funded program to rehabilitate culturally disadvantaged people. We'd like to supply you with a home of your own, a car, a generous bank account, and employment with our company. But there's a catch. You'll have to listen to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
Get ready to thrive loud with Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond, connecting you to the most inspiring and amazing people that are thriving each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Thrive Loud listeners, we listen to you. Today's guest combines many of the things you've been asking for: entrepreneurship, startup investing, connecting, and sports, more specifically, fantasy sports. He's the founder of the FantasyLifeApp, the must-have app for fantasy sports players and sports bettors with the fastest breaking news, advice, chats, trash talk, and more. He's the modern-day Renaissance man with his good looks, cool beard, and very young baby, who has been known to crash in on a few meetings and conference calls. Thrive Loud listeners, Yasin Abbak. Yasin, how are you today?
Hey, man, I'm doing really well. You make me sound a lot cooler than I actually am.
Oh, I'm just jealous, mostly because you have great hair. But otherwise, we all should know that you're also, I'm also jealous because you do something that a lot of our listeners do little bits about and have combined all those pieces about, starting your own company, doing the things you love, but also tapping into a really interesting niche. So if you could, Yasin, share with the listeners a little bit of how this became your gig, and then we'll go back and forth and talk about all the specifics about the app itself and where the world is going.
Yeah, sure. So I was actually running a startup before this, and I can even roll back to after I graduated college, actually, which is when my entrepreneurial journey began. So I graduated college in 2009, and I had a fantastic job offer that was eventually rescinded because of the economy. It was terrible timing. Really nobody's fault. I can't even blame the company that rescinded the offer. I was bitter at the time, but I didn't have a choice but to actually start a business. It's not like we grew up with much. My parents both immigrated here, worked incredibly hard. And when I graduated, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just sit home. It just it's not in my nature to just sit around and wait for things to happen anyway. So I started my first business, and we can get into that later, but essentially it was rugby t-shirts and selling them to college rugby teams as part of their fundraiser across the Northeast.
Smart.
A few months later, we did fine. I did $15,000 in sale, or in profit actually, that I pocketed that 1 month of sales that we had in September of 2009.
Oh, wow.
After we prepped the business over the summer. And then JP Morgan picked me up. So I eventually got into finance. I was there for 3 years, 2 years at Morgan Stanley. I was the youngest executive financial services director at the time, actually in company history, I believe. And I won the firm's global public speaking contest, and things were going great. And I actually started investing as an angel investor into startups because I was making a good amount of money, and I was stockpiling it essentially. I paid for a nice apartment in Manhattan so I could walk to work. But other than that, what was I going to do with the money that I was making? I couldn't go to school and get my MBA. So I figured I would get my pseudo MBA by investing in startups.
Right.
Eventually, and we can get into why, but eventually I ended up leaving banking and starting my own business. Did that successfully over 18 months, did about $500,000 in sales with a brand new product. And that earned me some decent respect and I guess a little bit of prominence in the entrepreneurial circles in New York. And AJ and Gary Vaynerchuk knew of me. We got to know each other pretty well. And along came one of their friends, Matthew Berry of ESPN. He is the person with the largest individual platform when it comes to fantasy sports. He is, for all intents and purposes, the godfather of fantasy sports. He popularized it in a lot of ways. And he was ESPN's senior fantasy analyst, and still is. Yep. And he was introduced to me by Gary and AJ, who said, "We think you guys would make a really good pairing. Matthew is a great door opener, and you're a person who can go and close deals and lead a company in its vision and its direction, and do that properly. So we think this is a slam dunk partnership. You guys should meet." And that's how I got involved with Fantasy Life.
Yasin, I want to ask a question in that little trip of the journey. What was the thing that got your belly most fired up? Was it the potential growth of taking a certain portfolio company and seeing it succeed, or the actual hunting and finding of the opportunities of the investment portfolio companies you were looking to invest in?
That's a good question. I don't know that it's one or the other. I can tell you that in general, I'm incredibly competitive, and I don't just like to be challenged. I really love to be challenged. I get bored very quickly if I think things are easy. So I would much rather take a difficult but challenging and in the end much more rewarding route than one that just pays well, for example. So for me, all of the investments that I got involved in and the companies that I built, they were ones that I thought were challenging, that if executed on properly, could go somewhere significant and can become a really big deal. And I feel exactly that way about Fantasy Life too.
Before we jump into Fantasy Life, I want to ask the question, what's the component of this entrepreneurial spirit and investing and dealing with the smaller companies that causes you a little bit of grief and pain in your stomach every morning as opposed to the energized drive to keep you going? What's the thing that stresses you?
Honestly, it's all of it. I don't think you can have the ups without the downs of being an entrepreneur. The ups are fantastic. I mean, they're really incredible. They get your blood pumping. They get you excited in the morning. You're excited to start the day. You're going to sleep really thinking through what you can do to bring this thing to the next level. But the other side of that coin is you're stressed. You're concerned with how long can we keep this going before that spark ignites the flame and we are onto something big. Do we have enough money in the bank? Are we monetizing in a way that is both smart, efficient, effective, and hopefully long lasting? Are we acquiring enough? Are we retaining enough of our users? And then one of the overlooked things is I do not like to take my team for granted. I have a fantastic team, an incredible team. And we don't necessarily deserve them because they're so fantastic and we're an early stage startup. So for us to be able to retain not just our users, but our talent, that's incredibly important. So, but that's stuff that that is the stuff that gives you heartburn in the morning, making sure that the journey is just as fulfilling for everybody else on your team as much as it is for you.
So Yasin, I want to ask this question. Are you a sports fan?
I am a sports fan.
Okay. What's your level of the things that you like from real sports before we dive into fantasy?
So I was actually a season ticket holder for the originally New Jersey Nets and now the Brooklyn Nets. Uh-huh. So I've always been when it comes to real sports, a basketball fan first. My favorite live sports are actually hockey. Yeah. Is the most exciting. And I'm not a big hockey fan. I love live hockey. It's a ton of fun. High energy. I've only been to playoff games, so maybe that influences it a little bit. But when it comes to watching on TV, I actually like American football the best.
Okay. So can you share with the listeners, many of them already know this, but I think you probably have more in-depth knowledge and specific information that would be really cool. Help the listeners understand how big fantasy sports, the industry itself, has become today.
So fantasy sports is a massive industry. And if we're talking just about fantasy sports, there's a fantastic association, the Fantasy Sports and Gaming Association, that runs these numbers and does this research. And I think the market overall is a $7.2 billion market. Now, that's fantasy sports, and it is growing. It is wildly popular, especially domestically. But now with PASPA, which was PASPA being knocked down, which essentially opened up the legality of sports betting across the country, that market potential has more than quintupled. Mm-hmm. A lot of very smart analysts and industry folks are saying that the market could top over 100 billion domestically.
Unbelievable. So we had Nigel Eccles, who had a new app that he was in about creating communities, and he's one of the founders of FanDuel. And we spoke about, we spoke about a lot of the challenges that he had gone through because he was there when that thing hadn't been lifted, and there was a lot of issues as it related to certain areas and where you can do fantasy sports. What I love about what you've done, and which I want you to share with the listeners, is Talk about what Fantasy Life app is, who the users are, and why this is important.
Sure. So it's a free app. It's from ESPN's Matthew Berry, and we give the fantasy and betting communities a competitive advantage with advice, reports, and the fastest breaking news in the industry. And right now we're live when it comes to the alerts and the reports, just August through December for the NFL season. But we're actually heading in the direction of providing what we do year round. And the first additional sports we'll be getting into very soon are NBA and MLB. What we end up doing for our users is monitoring thousands of sources and sending out relevant alerts that may impact lines, player props, or fantasy faster than any other service. That allows users to make smarter, quicker bets against sports books or against fantasy league mates who may not have yet adjusted to the news. And then you also have a robust community of a ton of people, especially during football season, that are both enjoying the alerts and saying they're freakishly fast, loving the reports because we keep it in a very simple format, easy to use, seriously next level stuff, but in a very consumable format. And we layer it all on top of a community, a great fantasy community that's always willing to give advice. So you're allowed to and able to post polls, 4-person polls, three-player polls, 2 option polls. You can join chats and get advice that way. You can actually even become your own influencer or promote your platform. If you're an influencer on Twitter or on Facebook and you have a following there, a lot of people end up building out an additional or initial following on the Fantasy Life app first because it's a very focused and concentrated group of people. It's a niche community. It's not a ubiquitous platform like Facebook or Reddit where you can find fantasy communities, but you don't really have focuses around features that are specific to fantasy betting or DFS. And that's where we tend to stand out. We are able to hyper focus on what the needs and wants are of that community.
So I love this laser focus on community and obviously picking a very specific community that is almost obsessive about content and information. Now, you mentioned this is a free service. Maybe explain from a business point of view where you think this could be going. Because it's interesting. We had a similar conversation with Nigel Eccles as it related to his podcast listening community, or they also did some sports information communities from some of the stuff they did with FanDuel. Where's the opportunity on the upside?
Sure. So when you think about Facebook at its early stage or Twitter or Instagram, these companies that eventually built into multiple $billion of value over time, they were not overnight successes as much as people would like to think that they are. They were built over time and over iteration upon iteration of learning from your user base and listening and paying attention to the data. And they eventually built into platforms that were monetizing mostly through ads. And that is certainly an opportunity for us where we can build out a platform that allows our users to benefit from companies that want access to them because they provide helpful tools. And when we are very specific about who we would work with and who we have worked with, we don't just want advertisers speaking at our community. We'd rather have them be a part of the conversation so they're additive to the community. And that's one route of monetizing. However, when you take a look at the numbers under the hood when it comes to sports betting, in New Jersey, for example, and what I'm about to tell you is not from me, this is from a Morgan Stanley analyst who covers the space.
Gotcha.
Casinos are paying between $500 and $1,300 per depositor to acquire these depositors. Now, we're getting these users essentially for free. It's a free platform, and people love the service that we provide. It's a fantastic service. It's a great community. It's aligned with Matthew Berry, and we've essentially built our own brand that is very respected and trusted now when it comes to news and information. And the community is stellar. So the opportunity that we see now is follow a little bit of what the Facebooks and the Instagrams of the world did, where you don't monetize immediately up front. You first learn about your community, you pay attention to the data, you allow it to organically grow, and then you iterate so that you can get your product to a place that makes a ton of sense, and you have true product market fit, where the market wants your product and your product is good enough that your users return. And we have incredible metrics when it comes to retention. And I actually think there's still even more room for improvement through light technological advances that we could make that data dictates we should make.
Yeah.
So that said, we don't necessarily need to monetize today. However, the potential to monetize because of how much our users are valued by sportsbooks, and by DFS companies, and just in general, our crowd, they're millennial men for the most part. They are an otherwise elusive and hard to target and reach audience.
Mm-hmm.
We have them, and we're not paying anything for them. So for us to then partner with sportsbooks, for example, would make a ton of sense, and that's the direction that we're headed in. Now, we don't like the idea of just saying, hey, sportsbooks, advertise on our platform, we have your audience.
Right.
Start talking at our community. I don't believe in that. You know my wife, you know that she's the world's leading expert in native advertising, in speaking in a natural way and integrating a brand story in a native integrated way instead of talking at a user base. Again, we'd much rather have them be a part of the conversation. Well, by the same token, we don't want to push people to sportsbooks unless we can provide them a significant value and advantage. So because we're already delivering incredibly fast alerts, there's an opportunity for us to actually identify the opportunities at sportsbooks when sportsbooks don't yet adjust their lines to the news. And that arbitrage exists.
Yeah, no, and I totally get that. I'm going to jump in. We'll also address the relationship listeners in a minute as to who this individual is. But I want to talk about, I was watching a game, a playoff football game at the time that hit. And I was absolutely fascinated with intra-game betting, that both fantasy and everything else that you can imagine. It was totally unbelievable. And in fact, I went to ESPN News and I saw a tremendous amount of intra-game things, like what the halftime spread was, what the new line would be. To someone who's that active and that involved, and by the way, there were fantasy-related bets in this as well, like how many players would score a touchdown or what would happen in the second half, all the stuff that you could basically make an opportunity on. How are you able? Are you giving those intra-game updates as well? Is that a vision too, where FantasyLifeApp can be most effective?
We actually do that already.
Great.
So for the NFL season, one of the things that our users love is, so that there's a delay between what goes on in the game live and what gets broadcasted, especially if you're on a streaming service.
Right. It's a 7-second delay on regular television. I assume it's even longer on others, right? So
certainly longer on streaming. And sometimes that 7-second delay is actually longer, especially if it's a large production like the Super Bowl.
Right.
So one of the things that our users love doing is saying, wow, I didn't even know that this person got injured until I got the Fantasy Life alert. And then 15 seconds later, I see the injury. It's crazy. My friends think I'm psychic. Stuff like that. We see it all the time. So that in-game, the mid-game injuries that happen, those can swing numbers in a significant way. They'll eventually influence the props that will be available for the second half or the third quarter or the fourth quarter. So they make a difference, and we provide them. What we'd like to do and what we will be doing is separating it out, because not everybody wants that in-play alert. So opting in and out of those types of alerts is something that we're actually working on now.
Yasin, I want to bring a point to our listeners. It's kind of interesting. I'm older than you are, and I also came from Wall Street and left from that world. And I remembered, even in the 80s and 90s specifically, the general perception for those that played fantasy sports, which was in its very infancy and the popularity where it was. The internet helped blow that thing up. But also, obviously, sports gambling was shunned upon because it wasn't legal. And I always used to make a comment, why the heck is anything related to sports, prognostication, involvement whether you call it portfolio management investing, which is technically what fantasy sports is, why is that any different than what we can do in regular investments in dollars, just because of who's collecting money and where it could be? Here we are 20, 30 years later. Not only is it the most active component of what's going on there, those numbers you said are staggering, and I would even argue globally they could even be even larger.
Much larger.
But I always thought about who made the big money back in the Wall Street days, and we'll make it rather timely at the time of this interview, and we'll take a gentleman by the name of Michael Bloomberg, who was just basically providing the information, just as Reuters was. And Bloomberg and Reuters provided Wall Street that information, and that information was the component of it. Now, different models and different subscription services because of how technology was today and who you were targeting. But I don't see that much of a difference. Do you?
I don't see much of a difference either. In fact, when you take a look at Bloomberg and how he built this out, he knew, everybody knew essentially that information was key. Information would eventually move markets. It's why executives at public companies have blackout dates that they can't trade on, because they have information that they shouldn't be able to trade on because it's not a fair market. Sports betting is still the wild, wild west. And it's the early days of information arbitrage. And that's what we're identifying, the information arbitrage that's available in these betting markets. So it's not very different. When you take a look at Bloomberg and you compare it to us and our vision and what direction we're going, and it's actually very similar. Now, if Bloomberg were to say, I'll make something up, AT&T, news comes out about AT&T, you expect it to tank. Yeah, you expect it to adversely affect what the earnings, the outcome would be. Totally got it. Right. Well, AT&T is listed on one exchange, right, domestically. So you only have one place to take a look at what the price is, and you move on that. Right. When it comes to sports betting, again, because it's still the wild, wild west, and there is no institutional incentive to really perfect the markets more than they are now to make it more efficient, you have multiple places where you can place trades. So take a look at Caesars or MGM or William Hill or DraftKings or FanDuel. You might actually get a different spread at each place. You might get a different player prop available. So that's the next direction that we're heading in, identifying those differences and letting our users very visibly and easily see where their best bet would be based on that recent news.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think what ends up happening, and I'm sure there are ways around that, ways where people will be directed this way, is you're dealing with the most active investors, and you could look at it as an institutional type investor can get involved with this, something that's been discussed. Many investment houses have looked at this because there is that potential opportunity as more legalities are allowed. Funds are doing it that way. But also, I think what's good is you've segmented the community. I love how you said, look, those intragame people are getting those alerts. That's one side. You've got other components as well, because people who might be just your casual fantasy sports fan who's getting information to figure out what lineup to put in versus those that are trying to figure out what the over-under is and the spread for the game. So I like how you've taken a community, identified them, and then are really laser targeting how you're giving the information to them, which is pretty sharp.
Yeah, thank you. We are trying to customize it to the different types of users that we have. And fantasy was always our sandbox to learn from, because we knew that there was an obvious applicability of our alerts to fantasy. But now that we are looking to apply it to different verticals or different tangentially related things, we are looking to customize that so that these people see value or can find value very easily. Even among the fantasy community, one fantasy player might just want major news, but they don't need to know if Tevin Coleman tweaked his ankle on a Wednesday practice for a Sunday game and was a limited participant. Maybe they just need Friday practice updates. So that's the direction that we're heading in. Another user could want every little detail, and they should be able to get what they want from us as well.
Now I'm going to ask one last question regarding Fantasy Life App before we talk a little bit more about you, Yasin, and that is, as it relates to the investors that you've been attracting to Fantasy Life App and continue to look at, do they tend to be big sports fans?
There's either sports players, so there's actual athletes that are involved with what we do. There are others that are big sports fans when it comes to, you're talking about investors in the company?
Yeah,
correct?
Investors in the, exactly. Those who'd want to invest in Fantasy Life App. Exactly.
So yeah, investors. So I'd say there are really 3, maybe 4 groups. I'll tell you after I tell you them, and then you can tell me how many I named.
Okay.
So one is actual athletes, people that understand the market and people that just want to get into space because they see the explosive growth of it and they see how much it's impacting their game, and they want to be on the forefront of technology that is going to enable the growth of sports betting. But also people that are just into fantasy, athletes that like fantasy in general, and all of them actually use our app. We don't have an investor that doesn't use the app and didn't use it before they became an investor. The second tranche of investors are ones that just see the money-making potential. The total addressable market is huge. A lot of our potential competitors are focusing on a very narrow piece of the market. I lovingly call them the nerdiest part of the market. The 1% of people that are like me, who wouldn't mind looking at spreadsheets all day and turning this into a full-time thing because, like me, they are data nerds. So they will do this. A lot of the tools that are out there are for them, but we're actually addressing everybody because we're building this intentionally for the everyday player. You don't need a degree in data science to understand what we do. So when it comes to investors that are looking for a financial return, and this has a lot to do with venture investors, they see the big money potential there because our audience is going to be very valuable to a lot of people, and because we are focusing on not interrupting the experience for our users and making money not by just selling to them, but rather providing a service to them that they will benefit from and that we can make money from. So venture capitalists actually like the opportunity quite a bit too, and it's a new market, which is exciting because a new market that has opened up for growth can provide significant venture returns. So the financial investors, the venture investors are a thing. Then there are the people that come from a finance background that are very drawn to us building out and identifying the arbitrage opportunities. Mm-hmm. And they just get it from the Wall Street mind to say, oh, this is the early days of
this is when they were all broker dealers. Before the NASDAQ was the NASDAQ, how things worked in the market.
Exactly.
Yeah. Very, very cool. Let's do this. I'm going to flip things around a little bit. Share with the listeners, if you could, all the places people can learn about Fantasy Life App. This is the admin part of the show. We will put all of it in the show notes. However, it always gets more engagement when they hear it from you.
Awesome. So go to FantasyLifeApp.com. You can download the app there. You can take a look at some of the reports that we put together throughout the season. But that's the place to get started. It's where you download the app. We're live on iOS and Android. We're 4.8 in both app stores after thousands of reviews. So we are very well liked. And that's the first thing to do. And I would say allow alerts, turn them on. And you'll start getting them at a minimum. You'll start getting them in August, maybe even late July for the NFL season, and we have them live until the end of the regular season. And depending on how a few things shake out, we might actually be able to introduce baseball and basketball alerts this year as well.
I look forward to when you also get football, as in the real football, soccer as well, just into it. So one day when it goes in there, just because I can't get over how much interesting information and stuff like that. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Very helpful. And in social media, we'll put all the links in. You're everywhere. Where should we, in Instagram, LinkedIn?
So for the app, it's Fantasy Life App. On Twitter, we're pretty engaging on Twitter. It's at Fantasy Life App. And I am You Found Yasin on Twitter. In the app, I'm just Yasin, Yasin. You're welcome to tag me there, DM with me. I'm very active there, as you can imagine. And Twitter, I'm intentionally not active on Instagram, though I'm more of a silent user of Instagram.
You're a stalker.
On Facebook, let me check. Let me check what my Facebook is really quick. I'm pretty sure
it's okay. We will put it on the show notes. I will make sure to put the link in there if you want to direct it, but if you have it handy.
Okay. Yeah. So that's where I am on social. On LinkedIn, you can always find me as well.
Awesome. All right. So we're going to learn a little bit more about you and head down Fun Street here. You are an entrepreneur, a startup investor. You're literally dealing with fantasy sports and stuff that you like each day, which is awesome. So you're loving life most of the time. And for those listeners that need to know this, I mentioned in the opening, you have a young child. So you've got a lot of great things going on and you're kicking on all cylinders and thriving. On the days when you're a little off or stressed or things are kind of bothering you, what practice do you seek or what individual do you seek out to get yourself back on the thriving track?
So, yeah, that's a really good question. A lot of people are exposed to the positives of being an entrepreneur, the sexiness of being an entrepreneur. And it's not always sexy. In fact, I would argue that most days it's not sexy. It is stressful. It can eat at you. And if you're, if you have the tenacity to get through, you can eventually break through and do something significant and big. And that hope and that trust and belief in yourself will get you through that for sure, for certain. However, along the way, there are, the momentum downward is very easy. It's very easy to pick up that momentum, both mental momentum that takes you down and the physical aspect of it too. It can be very physically draining. You should get very used to rejection. There are tons of reasons why investors will say no. Very infrequently are they personal. They just have to do with the venture aspect, just the venture landscape. It's one where for venture to work, the right investors need to get involved. And for your business to thrive, you need the right investors to get involved. So get used to rejection because not everybody is right for you and you're not right for everybody. So how do I get through that stuff? Structure. A lot of it has to do with structure. And I lose a lot of structure during the football season because we get incredibly busy. Mm-hmm. I work maybe, I'm not kidding, probably 18 to 19 hours, 7 days a week, August through December. I gain 25 to 30 pounds this year because of the daughter.
Okay.
And then the structure goes away because you wake up, you're working, and you're working until you go to sleep. So that structure goes away, and that's when it can become very mentally draining on me personally. When it comes to the rest of the year, the way that I get through it and the way that you go through the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur is, for me, it's structure. We get up early and I head to the gym and I spend a good 90 to 120 minutes at the gym. I'll do both strength training and cardio. And I do that 6 to 7 days a week. Not just because I have to lose that 25 to 30 pounds.
But you need it as the way to
season.
Move forward. It's your stress.
I do.
Release. Yeah.
It jump starts your day. You get back and you are excited to move forward because guess what? You woke up and you got a lot accomplished already. Yeah. Why would you want to stop that and get in your own way? It kickstarts you. So I love getting to the gym in the morning. I do not like going to the gym late. The type of person that's there is different as well. I feel like the people that are there in the morning, they have stuff to do. So they're not messing around. They're not throwing heavy weights around and trying to make a big show of them working out. They're there to accomplish something, and I'm there for the same thing. So that structure early morning is very helpful.
Thrive Loud listeners need to know that we recorded this early morning. He has yet to shower. He came straight from the gym to record this. I wouldn't
true.
Right out there. So tell us, Yasin, your all-time favorite movie.
Okay, so I'm going to get to my all-time favorite movie. I want to complete the answer that you last asked. How else do I get?
There's more. Oh my goodness.
There is more.
Sorry, structure was not the answer. Sorry, you got the workout. Continue. I didn't mean to. So, I thought. No,
that's okay. It's just this is something that I feel very passionately about.
Yeah.
So I don't want to dismiss the difficulty that an entrepreneur goes through that you don't necessarily read about very often. So if I can impart some things that have worked for me very well, I would love to share that with either aspiring entrepreneurs, struggling entrepreneurs, or even those that are going through some of the ups and downs like me.
Hit it.
What has worked for me incredibly well is having a partner in my love life, my wife, that is incredibly understanding and is truly my equal, that I can wake up and go to bed talking honestly with about both emotions, the state of the business, and the ups and downs of life. But having that communication is incredibly important to get you through the mental aspects of being an entrepreneur. I think spousal selection is, not to make it sound like like a medical term.
Does it need to run through an algorithm? Because if it does, there's a whole bunch of people that want to hear about it.
Yeah, sorry, it doesn't. I would build it if it did. Oh. I'm not sure what it runs on. Maybe we just got very lucky. But having that is a huge, huge part of how I can get through, in my opinion, from month to month, day to day, year to year. That clear, honest communication and approaching life as partners, very similar to business partners. We have very honest communication, and the same things that make a business work with partners are similar to the things that make a thriving supporting relationship work as well. And it starts with honest, open communication. So I would urge you to take spousal selection incredibly seriously. And when you find the one, don't let them get away.
I like it. We'll get back to the one in a minute. Let's jump to this. You have an all-time favorite movie?
I have a lot of favorite movies. When you asked me this question, I immediately thought of 7 Pounds with Will Smith. I love the movie. Okay. And then I took a look at Rotten Tomatoes and it got terrible, terrible ratings. So I thought, geez, I can't say 7 Pounds. That's a bad answer, obviously.
But it's what? Wait, hold on. I challenge that because what connects to you? If you think that's your favorite movie, whether the rest of the world doesn't or not, why would that? Well, let's go to that. Why does that movie connect with you?
It was a lot of, you know what it is? So I grew up with 3 younger brothers. My parents were immigrants. They sacrificed so much for the 4 of us. Seeing my parents sacrifice so much has meant the world to me and my brothers. Seeing my aunts sacrifice a ton for us, seeing my family come together and sacrifice what they had to, my grandparents, it has always meant so much to me. They've imparted wisdom on us. They've given us more than I knew that they could afford. They went to bat for us in ways that I hope I can replicate for our kids. So that theme has always been important to me. It's always played an important role in my life. And 7 Pounds, the things that I remember, and I can't tell you everything about the movie. I can tell you how it left me feeling. Mm-hmm. It was a man that was willing to sacrifice himself and everything to make the world better for deserving people, even at the cost of himself. So okay. That lesson stuck with me. It reminded me a lot of how we grew up, where it was very much communal. There was no. I'm obviously a very independent person, but our family is incredibly close. We have a huge family group text that is active all hours of the day. We're just incredibly close. So that feeling of community has always been very important to me. And I felt in a weird way that 7 Pounds was Will Smith's character's way of connecting to a community that he thought was, or pockets of community that he thought were incredibly important.
I just had a visual of one of your family members between the very large family group chat, very active, and all of the alerts from FantasyLifeApp coming through to them, basically like, please, I've had enough of you today. Can you stop talking to me?
By the way, I do get surprised that people like my aunt, who doesn't follow a single sport, is active on the app and gets the alerts. I'm like, why are you doing this? But it's because they love us and they support us.
That's awesome. When you're working out, and do you listen to music? And is there a jam that you love to hear that kind of helps you motivate, takes you to that next level?
Yeah, it's all music for me. I need something that, especially if I'm doing cardio, I need something that has a steady beat, like boom, 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 so I can keep pace with it. So I listen to a lot of things that have good, steady beats. I have premium Spotify subscription, and let me see. I'm taking a look through it now. Yeah, there's a bunch of songs that I like. As long as it's got a good beat and I can jam to it, you'll see me dancing on the bike or jamming out like hardcore between workouts, because the music gets me going. If I didn't have music, I don't know that I could sustain or have the mental fortitude to get through 75 minutes on a bike.
So I'll go with this one before we wrap here. As it relates to fantasy sports, do you like to play fantasy football? I'm guessing you do.
Yes. And
how did you do this season? The season that just ended, the season of 2019 into the 2020. So
I always, since Fantasy Life, I've been wrapped up into maybe 5 to 10 leagues each year, and that is like 5 too many. I think 2 to 3 is a good number. And you'd think that because I'm so in tune with what's going on that I'd win every year. But the real challenge is just getting into the playoffs. So I always make the playoffs no matter what league I'm in. I tend to make the playoffs at a minimum. But honestly, I'm so busy on Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
I will make the very rookie mistake of realizing at 10 minutes after kickoff that I did not set my lineup.
Yeah.
Because I was helping everybody else get their lineup set. So, what's that saying? I'm gonna really chop it up and make it terrible. But the cobbler's children don't have shoes.
The cobbler's children don't have any shoes. Right.
Yeah, there we go. That's me with fantasy the last few years.
I like it. So we've hinted at it earlier in the episode. Thrive Loud listeners should know that multiple time guest on this program, Melanie Diesel, who just recently came out, as you heard in our Thrive Loud catch-up episode a few weeks back, came out with her book, The Content Fuel Framework. And that is your better half, I'm going to say, in this end of the conversation. If we had this conversation, just to let you know, with Melanie, who I've known for a very long time and a trusted speaker and advisor, you wouldn't be the better half. But you agree with me on this.
I do agree with you. She's pretty cool.
So that's the connection for people here. And I got to tell you, I've only heard good things about you. I continue to be more and more impressed. I'm now about to receive many, many, many more alerts on my phone, I guess, when the football season comes next year, and I'll have you to blame for it. But
you'll have me to thank for it, I promise.
Exactly. Well, I want you and our listeners, I've appreciated the entrepreneurial story. I think this is really cool where you're sitting. I want to continue to watch and check in and see how this community grows. And thank you for sharing everything that you've been doing. And thanks for coming on Thrive Loud.
Thank you, Lou. This was a ton of fun. I really appreciate you having me on.
Truly a pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Make sure to subscribe on iTunes, Overcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. And follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Thrive Loud. Or find us on the web at thriveloud.com.